Hi. So many good friends here. I was just thinking today whether it's worse to talk to a group of people that you know really well or better to talk to a group of people that you don't know. So I'll let you know after it's over. Anyway, I'm just so honored to be here, aren't you? The Richard Nixon Library is just incredible, and I know you guys had a great tour. Good. So I'm delighted to be here today to share with you my 22 months foray into Iraq during the most turbulent time of the war, from 2004 to 2006. But first, I want to recall my first visit to the beautiful Richard Nixon Library. I was on the advance team for George H.W. Bush when this library opened on July 19, 1990. I was part of the team, the advance team that we had here that day was former Presidents Richard and Pat Nixon, George Bush and Barbara, Ronald Reagan and Nancy, Gerald Ford and Betty. It was a pretty heady day, I'll tell you. And I had kept urging the advance team to have a photo of the presidents in the World Leaders Room, which is so beautiful if you haven't seen it. And I urged them and urged them. They really didn't want to do it, and I kept pushing them. And they finally did it, and that was the photo that ended up on the front page of Time magazine. It was pretty heady. So I've been back to the library on several occasions for the lecture series and as a tourist. And I'm truly honored to be here as part of the lecture series tonight. For those who don't know me, I have had my own political consulting firm for over 35 years. I've been providing strategic planning for corporate clients and running political campaigns, including the two I think Jonathan may have mentioned. I was the regional director for George H.W. Bush, and I had California, Nevada, and Hawaii. And I was the manager of the 1986 Clint Eastwood for Mayor campaign. Now, in all of my career, everything that I've done in my career, including riding on Air Force One with the president, people always want to know all the inside about Clint Eastwood, and of course I never tell all those details. And I said to him a few years ago when he said, well, tell me everything you've been doing. And I said, well, in all of my career, people only want to know if I slept with you. And he said, well, what do you tell them? And I said, I don't tell them anything. And then I said to him, well, don't they ask you the same thing about me? So he thought that was pretty funny. So anyway, I've run many campaigns, high-profile statewide initiatives, countless county, city, other local elections, more than I care to remember. And this is the first year that I'm not doing any elections, and I'm so happy already. I have less gray hair. It's wonderful. In addition, I've always been a passionate supporter of women's rights and have devoted a lot of my life to furthering this cause. Whether it was advocating for policy change or sitting on numerous nonprofit boards or helping mentor women professionally and personally. So I know you're wondering how a then 60-year-old Republican female consultant from Orange County, California, ended up in the midst of the Iraqi war, creating and running a program for helping the Iraqi women to participate in whatever economic recovery was going to happen because of the war. In the aftermath of the initial invasion, the U.S. Congress appropriated $18.4 billion of our U.S. Tax money for the construction and repair of Iraq's infrastructure. Mostly that was due to a lot of war and a lot of neglect, because Saddam never used any of the money he did to repair his country. He let it fall apart. A few, and only a few, of those Pentagon reconstruction contracts required a plan to provide the women to have a part in the reconstruction. So on behalf of one of the bidders, I was asked to write a plan that would be submitted as part of their proposal. I never intended actually to go to Iraq, never. Building support for the invasion, as you may recall, President Bush promised Iraqi women that he would restore their rights, repair their country, and get rid of Saddam. Having been an activist on behalf of women's rights for years, I started from the premise that no matter where women come from, they need a level playing field and an opportunity to start new businesses, get training and jobs. I believed from the beginning that unless Iraqi women had a stake in the economy, democracy didn't have a chance. I based my plan on that concept. I knew nothing about Iraq at the time, nothing about the Middle East. But months later, the bidder I was working with was notified that they had won the contract. They received high marks for the women's plan. And they came back to me and asked me if I would go to Iraq, and I said, no way, I wasn't going to go. I hate guns. It's not a place for me to go. But they asked me if I would think about it, and I said I would. After thinking about it, I realized that in 3 decades of professional consulting in political management, in governmental policy, and working to empower women, this was a chance of a lifetime for me to put up or shut up, both as an American and as a woman. So I was already turning 60, which I hope none of you do the calculations. I was already restless. I had the same clients for a number of years, and I was thinking about doing something that would get me out of my comfort level, much like President Bush did when he jumped from an airplane at age 80, and much like our own former Senator Marion Bergeson jumping at age 90. I was thinking of taking surfing lessons because I don't surf. So it was Iraq, surfing, Iraq, surfing. So I decided to take the big leap and go to Iraq, and I said I would only go for 6 months. So I put my clients on hold, I handed them out to other people, and off and running I went. But Iraq was not my first brush with emerging democracy. I had done political consulting, training, and organization development work for an organization out of Washington, D.C. I was in Guatemala, Sri Lanka, former Soviet Union, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, and Indonesia. But this would be my first experience in a war zone, unless you can count being a moderate Republican in conservative Orange County a war zone. And many of you understand that comment a lot. But little did I know that I would end up staying in Iraq almost 2 years and reach beyond everything that I had done in my life. I looked at this as an adventure and an opportunity of a lifetime to impact the fledgling democracy, to support the efforts of my country, and to test my strength and commitment to helping women in an environment that I knew nothing about. So I put my successful business on hold. I recruited a young Iraqi-American woman, my friend there, Esra, who was managing a shopping center bank in Carlsbad, someplace down there. Her parents had already gone back to Iraq. Without Esra, I tell you, I wouldn't have been able to do half of what I did. She had the language and the cultural, she knew all that, she had some contacts. Esra is a story in itself, believe me. I'll give you a little hint. Her family fled Iraq in 1991. They lived in a refugee camp for 2 years. They asked for political asylum. They ended up in Irvine, California, of all places, Catholic Charities. They worked hard and became proud American citizens. They went back. Her mother and dad actually went back in 2003 when the war started to help topple Saddam and reclaim their property. Esra's father was kidnapped in November 2005. I still can't say that. Oof. Esra actually stayed in Baghdad and ran the women's program a year or at least 2 years after I left. We arrived in Baghdad on June 1st, 2004, and the war started in 2003, as you will recall, so it was pretty ripe then. After 2 days of briefings in Kuwait, we boarded a C-130 for Baghdad with stops in Basra and Kirkuk. Now, I had never even seen a C-130, and I didn't even know what it was. I had no idea what it was. But they told us that we had to be careful because they had to take evasive action when landing in Kirkuk. We were going to land in Kirkuk first. And they had to take evasive action because the insurgents would shoot down planes. So the plane would go like this so the insurgents couldn't hit us. So they handed us a business envelope, just a regular business size envelope, and they said if you have to throw up, you have to use this. Well, Esra and I decided it wasn't going to be us that threw up on the airplane. There were only 4 or 5 women on the airplane with over 75 service members, men, and we weren't going to be the ones to be embarrassed and throw up. There were no bathrooms on the plane. I remember this is so funny. I was thinking about it today again. There were no bathrooms on the plane. There was just a circle, which wasn't much bigger than this podium. It was a circle with a curtain around it. And it had a urinal. That's all it had. And so that was it. So we didn't, one, we couldn't use the bathroom, and two, we couldn't throw up. So I was beginning to get a little scared then, not knowing, what was in front of me, and feeling responsible for this woman I had recruited. But my life in the green zone was always interesting, never a dull moment. When we arrived in the green zone, we were met by one of the members of the company we were assigned to. And he took us immediately to the mess hall and said, and this, I think we landed like maybe 7 o'clock at night. It was starting to get dark. And he said if we didn't go directly to the mess hall and eat, we wouldn't be able to eat till the next morning because the mess hall had certain hours of food and you couldn't eat any other time. So if you didn't eat then, you didn't eat till the next morning. And it was really incredible. It was open seating, this huge, gigantic room, open seating, the soldiers and the contractors and the Iraqis, everybody would sit together. You could sit anywhere. The food was horrible, thanks to KBR. My way of protesting, you had to sign, remember we had to sign in for our food, you had to sign your name and your social security number. And so I would always sign Elvis Presley or, some other name and never put my name. I was protesting because the food was so bad. But the green zone was a 5.5 square mile. It was protected by the Tigris River on one side, the Republican Palace on the other side. It was huge. It's like the palace was about at least a mile long. And then on the other sides by the military and barricades. Within a short period of time, I went from living in a 3,000 square foot house in Laguna Niguel to living in a high school classroom with 5 other women. Our first 6 months in the high school, built for the children of the Republican Guard, there were no dressers, no partitions between the beds, and they were little, not even twin-sized beds. They were smaller, and the mattresses were about that big. The bathrooms were down the hall, outside and down the hall, and I had to write to my girlfriend and have her send me pajamas because I didn't have any pajamas that were suitable for me to walk outside and down the hall past all these people. Our school was between the Ministry of Defense and the Tigris River, and it seemed like every morning at 6 a.m., the insurgents would try to hit the Ministry of Defense, and the mortars would always fall in our schoolyard. And it was our wake-up call, and there were people that were killed, some of our guards, so I don't laugh about it. Our second 6 months, we lived in a trailer, which, I use that word lightly. It was sort of one of those containers that you see at the ports where they move product. It was a huge container, and where we lived was behind the Republican Palace in a trailer park. It was the embassy at the time. And we called it Mortar Alley because every night at 7 o'clock, the mortars would start trying to hit the palace. And the big voice in the sky, which the embassy would do, would all say, head for the bunkers immediately. So we'd all have to go to the bunkers, and we stay in the bunkers for an hour while the mortars hit, and sometimes they hit something, sometimes they didn't. So we'd have to stay in there until we heard the all clear sign. In August of 2005, we moved into our very own rooms. It was a big day for us. They were 9 by 12, including a bathroom. California law requires our prison cells to be bigger than that. So it was sort of like a Motel 6, and at least you had your own bedroom, you had your own shower water that you were standing in. You weren't standing in everybody else's shower water. It was really like moving into a palace for us at that point. We lived with the constant sound of helicopters flying overhead so close that we could almost touch them. Gunfire, car bombs, mortars, 24/7, hitting closer to us than we even care to remember. Baghdad's summer temperatures averaged 100 to 130 degrees. We were wearing 40-pound flak jackets and 9-pound helmets. It was horrible. Sometimes I didn't wear them, but I always seemed to have gotten in trouble for that. I couldn't complain, though, because our troops wore flak jackets and they carried 75 pounds of attachables. And they marched in the hot sun every day. Every day they had to do that. It was terrible. No shade in the sun. I became known as a cigar lady because I had a friend in Florida who owned a cigar company, and she would send me a box of cigars every month. And I would take the cigars and buy Gatorade, and I'd hand it out to the Marines every week. I usually did it on Wednesdays so that they could party on Thursday nights, because Thursday nights were sort of our night off because Friday was a religious holiday. So I'd bring them cigars and Gatorade, and then they could party with their friends and smoke cigars, and everybody was happy. I tried to bring some normalcy into my life, and I had my fly fishing rod sent over because I'm a fly fisherman. And so I fished the Tigris River every Friday morning, the polluted but infamous Tigris River. When traveling outside the green zone, we traveled in 3 up-armored cars and with 6 big bruising British guards or U.S. Army guards in Humvees. When we traveled in the Humvees, I don't know if I can get through this without crying either, but when we traveled in the Humvees, I was always amazed at the young guy who was standing in the turret in the middle. You know, he stands up in that turret, because he was there to protect my life. And I always thought, oh my God, that's just incredible. And I used to grab him by the leg, you know, because I could only see his legs. I used to grab him by the legs and thank him. So young, you know, they were there to protect us. It was really scary and very dangerous, but we did it a lot, didn't we? They used to tell us, whatever happens, do not get out of the car. When the shooting starts, bombs hit, whatever, do not get out of the car. Because the men always had a tendency, when the shooting started, to get out of the car and run and hide. And they said that was the worst thing you can do. Esther and I looked at each other and said, don't worry, we're never getting out of this car. You'll have to ply us out. Fortunately, we never were hit. We never, but we sure heard them firing guns all the time, because if anybody got close to our vehicle, they would actually fire their guns in the front of the car that got too close to us, or they'd throw water bottles at it and scream and yell. It was really sort of rude, I thought, but you know, you couldn't. They were there to protect our lives. Before I go on, I want to give you just a quick, short refresher course on Iraq. It's 27 million people. It's about the size of California. Baghdad population was 6 to 7 million people, bordered by Kuwait, Syria, Turkey, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. It's the home of the Tigris and the Euphrates River, which just saying those names still gives me goosebumps to this day. It's the home of Babylon and the Hanging Gardens. It's the home of the world's first civilization. Arabs and the Kurds are the 2 largest ethnic groups. 97% of Iraq's population is Muslim. Shias are 60% and Sunnis are 30%. And the Shias are in control now. Saddam was a Sunni. The Iraqi women, I'll tell you, were fascinating. You know, women are the bellwether of democracy all over the world. And if democracy is ever to take hold, they have to have an economic stake in the economy. And that was my job, to help them do that. Iraqi women had more rights than most anywhere else in the Middle East. Everybody gets so surprised by that, but it's true. With the exception of Israel, of course. But their Constitution of 1970 provided them equal rights: the right to vote, the right to attend school, the right to run for political office. Esther's mother ran for political office while we were there. The right to own property, the freedom from harassment in the workplace, and they even have 5 years of maternity benefits. But to impress the World Bank, women were encouraged to get an education because it made Saddam look better. So there were more women engineers in Baghdad than anywhere else in the Middle East. But the Saddam regime got ugly with power and brutalized the Shiites, and women and children suffered the worst, as in any war. Iraqi women are phenomenal. They're tough and clever, evidenced by the fact that the very day that we were watching on television when the Saddam statue was taken off the pillar, they were out organizing to reclaim their rights. I always think that's so fascinating. Iraqi women expected to have a higher and more active role in the new Iraq, and we let them down right from the beginning, and I could tell that that was going to happen. We supported, the United States, our person on the ground, we supported only 3 of 25 capable, educated women appointed to the 250 transitional government that we put in place. We only supported 3 out of 25. Iraqi women demanded 40% representation in their government, and after fighting for 2 years, they ended up with 25%. Well, it's still better than ours, even today, land of the free, home of the brave. The United States has one of the lowest representations in all of the developed countries. We're at 19%. 19%. We are 97 on a list of 187 countries with parliaments or legislatures. 97 on a list of 187 countries. Whenever we get to feeling like we're all so wonderful, we need to remember these things. We are just above Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan's at 98, we're at 97. Rwanda has 39%, South Africa has 36%, Cuba has 36%, and even Afghanistan has 27% representation. I mean, I find that amazing. We have a lot of work to do here. The women's initiatives were a 3-pronged effort, which frankly reflects the needs of women everywhere, not only in Iraq, but jobs, training, and the opportunity to compete. Women made up 63 to 65% of the population, more than 2/3 of the workforce. So we couldn't afford to ignore them, the largest part of the population, well, anywhere, let alone Iraq. We held seminars all over Iraq. It was very dangerous for the women to come to us. And they always wanted to come into the green zone, but it was very dangerous for them. But using Esra's contacts and language skills, we brought in lunch and snacks every time we did a seminar. And we also helped pay for their taxi fares. You know, they had to take several taxis, like 4 or 5, to come to meet us, because if they were followed, they would come and they would be killed. So they took 4 or 5 taxis from their home so they wouldn't be followed. And so we always tried to help them pay for the taxi fare. Our seminars became very popular, not only because what they learned from us, and we made them learn, didn't we? But we also fed them. We gave them a nice lunch, and we helped them, and we went back. We never let them alone. We kept working with them. We trained approximately 350 women-owned businesses to bid and win U.S. government contracts, and we held seminars all over Iraq. We broke down the RFPs that were written in English. I mean, how disgusting that we would go to Iraq and the websites for these women, anybody to bid on a contract, the contracts are written in English. And of course, you know, we were in an Arabic country. So we rewrote the RFPs, and we wrote them in English, and we put them on slides, and we taught the women how to respond to the contracts. The PowerPoint that we developed for the Corps of Engineers is still on their website in English and in Arabic. Winning a U.S. government contract really allowed the women to have a real stake in the economy, because they could build a business for that. And we used to not only help them build that business, but we would also make them commit to hiring other women so that they can train other women, that other women could start their businesses. We held our first seminar in Baghdad at the convention center, and oh my God, everybody said, no, it's not going to work, they're not going to come, there are no women-owned businesses in Iraq. I mean, you know, we heard it all, and we were going to do it. Our first seminar in Baghdad at the convention center, we had 58 women-owned businesses there. 58. Now, maybe they weren't all women-owned businesses, maybe men owned some of them and the women, you know, fronted them. I mean, just like America, that's what they do here. And I didn't care. I felt that if we just got 2 women-owned businesses, I'd be perfectly happy. In Kirkuk, we stayed on a military base, but we weren't able to bring in women because one of the mess halls had been bombed 2 or 3 weeks before, so they didn't want us to bring in any Iraqis into the military base. So we negotiated, and we decided that we would go outside of the military base, which is a big thing. You know, anytime Esra and I traveled, we had to have the approval of our security team. We couldn't just get in a car and go anywhere, although I threatened that all the time. But we couldn't just go anywhere. We had to have approval from the security force, and we had to have a military base that would accept us and take care of us. So in Kirkuk, we sweet-talked the colonel, because he wouldn't let the women in. We sweet-talked the colonel, who didn't really like us when we showed up and really showed it, but he warmed up to us after a while. But we sweet-talked him into letting us go outside of the base into the business center in Basra, which was a big deal. You know, that was, for us Americans, to hold a seminar outside of the military base was a big deal. But we were able to get it done. It wasn't easy, but nothing was easy there. He assigned us a military security force, and they were all women. The gunners were women, the drivers were women, the guards were women. The head of the military force was his daughter. I mean, I found that to be so exciting. Another seminar we held in Basra, the security turned bad, we weren't allowed off the base, and we had to have the women come to us. And that created a huge nightmare for us as well. Security decided that they didn't want the women to come on base. They wanted to pat them down. And, it was just always such a hassle. But we finally decided they decided for us that they would allow the women on base if they would walk past a cage with dogs in it, and the dogs would smell them to see if there was any bombs or anything on them. Well, Arabs hate dogs. They think they're dirty, and it was awful. And Esther said, the women are going to freak out. We're not going to be able to do this. So I made Esther walk between the girls and the dogs. She always had to take the bullet occasionally. So we ended up getting the women on base. It was okay. Everybody was happy. We had a great seminar. And I was told that, I know. So that was the time I think we took General Bostic, because we couldn't, our ride was canceled to Basra. You know, the women's program never really had a high priority. And I understand that in a war zone, you know, other people have a priority before us. So I talked the general into taking us down on his helicopter, and that was a story in itself. You know, I had coffee with his aide, and the aide said, well, you know, I'll ask him, but I don't think so. I said, well, just give me 6 minutes to make the sale, and we'll see what happens. So he said, okay, you got 6 minutes. It was like 8:30 at night. Esther and I went over, and there was General Bostic sitting at his desk, and I started talking with no commas, no periods in my sentences, just all commas, and he went, who are you? What do you want? So I sold him on this idea that he would take us to Basra. We'd have this great women's program. He could give the opening remarks, welcome the women, how wonderful that would be in Iraq, because it hadn't been done before. And the women would look at him and think he was such a big deal and a great guy, and it'd be good for everybody. And so that's what we agreed. He would take us on his helicopter. And then his aide told me, you know, well, what do you want him to say? I said, I'll write his talking points, not to worry. I'll lay out everything. So I wrote his talking points. I delivered it to him that next morning. And the next day we left for Basra on his helicopter. And then I had to tell them he wanted to stay for the whole seminar, and I had to tell him, the general, that he couldn't stay. And that was a thing that made everybody uncomfortable. But I said, you know, the women will be intimidated by you. You can't stay. You have to leave. You can come back for lunch if you want to, but you can't stay. And his aide said, well, what's he going to do down there? And I said, well, he's got 50,000 troops down there. Let him go say hello to them. So he finally agreed to do it, and he became one of our biggest supporters, actually. So he came back for lunch, and we had a couple of contractors come in, and the women got to know them, and the contractors got to know the women. And so, you know, I wanted to be able to get women those contracts that they needed so desperately, and so I did it much like I would do here in the United States. We were promised a lot of resources when we went to Iraq, but when we got there, of course, we had no resources and little or no help. And it wasn't because nobody believed in the women's program. They were just too busy, and it was just like, you know, don't bother me now, I'm doing something. And they were always trying to get Esther and I to do something else, write a press release or write a report or, you know, and I finally said, look, I risked my life to come here. I risked Esther's life to come here. I'm going to do what I'm going to do down here and just get out of my way and let me just get it done and get the hell out of here. So by the end of March 2006, we trained 1,190 senior women in government in leadership and management, finance and budget, English, computers, public training, public speaking, and train the trainer. I used the internet because we had no resources, but I used the internet at night, which was sort of new to me at the time in 2004. I wasn't a big genius, I'm still not, but I used the internet at night to put together a curriculum for these women, and I'd use the United Nations website and NGO website and any website I could find to put together a curriculum that would match what we wanted to teach. And then Esther would find a professor in the red zone who would teach to our curriculum. We would survey the professors and women after every class and ask them what they learned, how they were going to use what they learned. We asked the professors how the students did. Were the students were they participating? Did they like the program? Is there anything we needed to change? And we would change the program daily if we had to. We didn't have the luxury of a course that took 1 or 2 years. We only had weeks to train these women in something that was sort of difficult at the time. And sometimes, really funny, we would bring 10 or 15 women to Jordan to teach. When we couldn't find a professor in Baghdad to teach a program, we would bring the women to Jordan. And that was really funny. Everyone asked us to do gender mainstreaming programs. I didn't know what gender mainstreaming was. I had never heard about it, never heard it. And so I was on the website trying to figure out what it was and finally put together a curriculum. And in the UN, that kind of world, it's teaching women and men in the Arabic world to work together. So we couldn't find a teacher in Baghdad, so we found a professor in Jordan to teach. So we got all these women onto a C-130, and we took them all to Jordan. And it was a comedy, I'm telling you. Sometimes the women had never been out of Iraq, they'd never been on an airplane, they'd never been in a hotel, and it was like, oh my God. And I remember one day we got them all into this hotel, and Esther and I weren't staying at the same hotel because they would drive us crazy. So we got them into the hotel, we got them situated in their rooms, and then they came down to the lobby, and they were screaming and carrying on like crazy people. And I kept saying to Esther, what are they saying? What are they saying? What's going on? What's going on? And it turned out they didn't like their rooms, or they didn't like who they were rooming with. They didn't want to room with anybody. It was just a nightmare. And then Esther got really mad at them and started screaming at them. And I said, Esther, what are you saying? What are you saying? And it turned out, so she said, I can't believe you're acting like this in front of Eileen. She risked her life to come here. So they all settled down, and they ended up liking the rooms. Oh, it's just so funny. Our most important accomplishment, I've got to say, was raising the level of confidence of the Iraqi women. And the feeling of true accomplishment that I got, and I know Esther got, seeing our progress every day, really moving forward. You really saw the end result, women that won contracts and were now working and feeding their family, Previous to that, women had jobs, but they didn't have careers, and so they weren't paid a lot of money, they weren't given any respect. So the feeling of accomplishment was pretty incredible. I guess that's why I ended up staying almost 2 years. Helping to win more than 500 U.S. government contracts for women-owned businesses. That was a pretty incredible, and that was only the ones that we could monitor. There may have been more, we think there was more, but of the ones that we could monitor, we know we ended up getting at least 500 contracts for women-owned businesses. Thanks. And finally, after a year of negotiating with the Corps of Engineers, I ended up winning approval for set-asides for women-owned businesses. Now, I wasn't always a big fan of set-asides. I really didn't quite understand it. But in Iraq, what we were trying to do was get women contracts. The Americans were so afraid of the Iraqi women that they didn't know how to talk to them. They didn't know what was right or wrong. And so I really felt that if we had the Corps of Engineers set aside just 5% of the thousands of contracts that they were given, that women could bid against each other, because the men they had the bigger contracts over $1 million, so they always had U.S. support or British support partners. But the women had none of that. So in order for them to win a contract, it was triple hard for them. So I fought with the Corps of Engineers for a year before I finally got them to agree to an award or set-asides. Now I'm a big supporter of set-asides. So I told you, we set out to try to get the women to bid on those contracts that were $1 million and under, because that was the ones that they could personally handle. Because there were no banks, there were no checking accounts. I mean, it was pretty loose at that time. Again, I really felt that if we were able to get women to have a business, then they could really participate in the economy. Not just a job, but a business, and hire other women and make money and over again. Because just like here, once you get a U.S. government contract, if you've done a decent job, you'll have that contract, it'll go on and on forever. So we always made the women promise that they would research, what they were saying in the bid, they would do it on time, they would come in on budget. We were not going to let them do the same thing that the men did, always came in over budget and way out of line. So it wouldn't be me if I didn't share some personal observations. The U.S. made big mistakes, and I think we all sort of recognize that by now. We didn't send enough troops. We didn't close off the borders. We fired all the military, all the police, all the heads of businesses. We fired all the professors, and we showed arrogance and impatience toward the Iraqis every day. Anyone that was a Ba'ath Party member was assumed to be a bad person, much like being a Democrat in Republican Orange County years ago. Most Iraqis were kept out of the reconstruction process. The Iraqis that were included were those Iraqis that had fled Iraq and came back after 20 years for the spoils of war. That was just unfair. So those were the ones that were getting all the work. So we put all these men out of work. They couldn't feed their families. So they went to the insurgents because they could make $300 to put a bomb under our car or something. So they had to make money to feed their families. We hired thousands of third world country workers for jobs that should have gone to the Iraqis. We ignored our own advice. All politics are local. We didn't invest in the people of Iraq. We did nothing to stimulate the local economy. We imported everything. We brought in thousands of copy machines, for example, and every ream of paper, every pencil was imported from the United States or from Britain. Everything was imported: food, pencils, hammers, everything. We never bought anything in Iraq. Instead of doing the little things that might have made life easier for the Iraqis, like maybe giving them each a generator, we didn't. We fostered distrust and an environment that it was easy for the insurgents to win them over. The most disappointing of all, Iraq is turned back to be a really dangerous place, almost as dangerous or maybe even more dangerous than it was during the height of the war. After spending $1 trillion, $1 trillion US dollars, and losing over 6,000 US military lives and over 150,000 Iraqi lives, there is still no clean water, electricity for only a few hours a day. It breaks my heart to this day. We were so focused on building the multi-million-dollar state-of-the-art facilities for everything that we failed to have a plan. We failed to think it out. We failed to figure out how they were going to take care of all this stuff when we left. We sort of blundered our way into Iraq, and it was an even greater blunder to get out before stabilizing, which, I believe, and many others believe, is the beginning of ISIS. On the banks of the Tigris River, where I fished every Friday morning, sits the U.S. Embassy. It is the largest U.S. embassy in the entire world. It cost over $750 million US dollars. It's larger than the Vatican City. It's 1.5 miles long. That's 94 football fields long. It opened in 2009. It's heavily fortified, self-contained. It has a full-size basketball court, a full-size soccer field, a pool with 6 lanes for swimming. It houses up to 10,000 people, including 2,000 diplomatic personnel. There's about 5,000 in there now. It also has stores, shopping centers, grocery market, everything. Probably a Burger King and a Yeah. No, not Starbucks. Less than 2 months after the American troops left, though, the State Department began cutting back the enormous diplomatic presence it had planned for Iraq. It's a sharp decline in the American influence in the country. To make the cuts, the embassy hired Iraqi staff and sourced more goods to the local economy, which is what we should have been doing all along. The operating budget in 2012 was $6 to $10 billion. $6 to $10 billion in 2012. The size of our embassy staff is even more remarkable when compared with those of other countries. Our embassy in Turkey, for instance, which is Iraq's largest trading partner, has more economic influence than the United States. It employs 55 people. And the number of actual diplomats is in the single digits, 55 people compared to 5,000 in the other one. So there is so much about Iraq that I'll never forget. I mean, it changed my life forever. I'll never forget Esra's father being kidnapped in 2005, the pain and disappointment in raising enough money for the ransom and knowing that we may never see him again. I'll never forget the Iraqi women, such tragedy in their lives. Every day they would send their kids off to school not knowing if they'd see them at night. I mean, it's still that way. But they could still laugh and joke, and I used to say to them, how could you laugh? And they would joke just like we women get together for lunch and we talk about men and stuff. They do the same thing. They are so much, women are the same all over the world, believe me. So they would do the same thing, and I'd say, well, how can you joke and laugh? And they said, well, you know, we have to live. We can't be crying all the time. I'll never forget there was a $300,000 reward on my head and that of an American woman. And I said to the people that we worked with, if they settled for anything less than $1 million, I would sue them. So I'll never forget being assigned a flak jacket, a helmet, and a gas mask. The gas mask sort of freaked me out a little. I'll never forget traveling in Iraq. Sometimes it would take us 3 days to go 500 miles. The women's program was not a high priority for travel. I remember we got stuck in Balad, which is the largest military base in the Middle East, and we got stuck there for 4 days. We were on our way to where? Kirkuk. We were stuck in Balad for 4 days while the sandstorms, I'm telling you, I'm not exaggerating. You cannot see your hand in front of your face during one of their sandstorms. So our helicopter had to land. We had to stay in Balad for 4 days. So we were lucky enough, though, that a U.S. contractor standing behind us in line, trying to figure out what was going on, had a cook and a trailer, and he gave it to Esra and I that we could stay there. Otherwise, we had to stay in a tent for 4 days, and which was, believe me, not very pleasant. I'll never forget crossing the Tigris River for the first time. Oh, my God, I just was speechless. I'll never forget my first trip out of the green zone, the feeling of terror, knowing that somebody wanted to kill me that didn't even know me. And I understand there are people that know me that want to kill me, but to have people that don't even know you want to kill you is so incredible. I'll never forget our first ride in a Chinook helicopter, just like the C-130. I didn't know what it was. I'd never seen it before. I had no idea. And they forgot to tell us that before we land, they have to drop flares, so if there are insurgents trying to shoot at us, they would shoot before we land. So they dropped the flares so the insurgents would start shooting. Well, they forgot to tell us about that, and we thought we had been hit. We didn't scream or cry. We just held on to each other. But it turned out that we landed and everything was fine. I'll never forget standing beside the Euphrates River. Oh, my God, it was so incredible and so beautiful. In Hila, touring Babylon, the 2,600-year-old Lion of Babylon is still there, and I touched it. I'll never forget the mortars falling in the parking lot of our office all the time. In the beginning, we used to laugh that the bad guys couldn't hit anything, but then they did. I'll never forget the suicide bombers blowing up the Green Zone Cafe in the Haji Mart in October of 2004. It was a place that we were all told not to go, but of course we all went. And it was inside the Green Zone, but, run by Iraqis, and our security guy used to tell us that if the insurgents want to kill Iraqis, Americans, they know exactly where you are, so we don't want you there, but we used to go there all the time. And so the mortars, the two suicide bombers went in and blew up the place. And even the 10 guys that I had rode back with the day before on a British flight coming back from R&R, they were all killed that day. I'll never forget a friend of mine who was a Marine in Iraq. Wounded, his son was a Marine in Iraq, and he was wounded by an IED. His father sent out a note to his list in the evening saying that his son, that Brian had been hit by an IED and that he didn't know anything about what was happening, but he would tell everybody as soon as he figured it out. So I decided that Esther and I would go over to the hospital and find him, and so because it was right across the street from us. So we went across the hospital, and they didn't keep great records, but they did tell us that he wasn't badly hurt. He wasn't in surgery, otherwise he'd be on the log. So he was one of the Marines that had been taken care of and sleeping on the floor in the lobby or in the hallway. So we ran around to each guy and said, "Are you Brian? Are you Brian?" And finally we came to Brian, and he woke up and he said, "Who the hell are you?" And I said, "Your father sent me to check on you." And this big Marine started crying, and then of course I started crying. So that was fun, and I took a picture of him with Esther and I and went back to my office and emailed it to my friend, and by the time he woke up in the morning, the first email he saw was his son and Esther and I. So we knew everything was okay. So I'll never forget Thanksgiving in Baghdad on November 25th, 2004. We were just sitting down to this incredible turkey dinner that they had flown in, and there must have been 40 of us, and the mortars started hitting. Oh my God, it was horrible. And we had to go to the bunkers, and we had to stay in the bunkers for an hour and a half. Our food got cold, but it was okay. I mean, we were all together, and it was fun. I'll never forget fly fishing in the Tigris River with the helicopters flying over the head, and you know, the security guys hanging out the edge, just like you see on TV. And I'm sure they're thinking, what the hell is that woman doing down there? But I was out there fly fishing, having a great time. I'll never forget seeing the effect of government bureaucracy firsthand. Our office was between the red zone and the palace, and the big, huge tanks and with our troops would come in every day for their rest period, their breaks. I don't know. I mean, I never heard of this before, but they'd drive down the street and they would park right near our office building across from the hospital. And there'd be 15, 20 of those gigantic big tanks with our soldiers hanging out, smoking and eating and having fun and just taking a break. And like all kids everywhere, they would throw their food wrappers on the ground and the trash built up, and it was ugly and horrible. And the little kids in the green zone would come in and they'd sell them shoes and watches and DVDs. And so I went to the general and I had this great plan, and I said, here's a great idea. Why don't we pay these young kids to clean up the green zone? We'd pay them money, they would earn money. We'd clean up the green zone because it's very dangerous, it was very dangerous. People could put a bomb under there or an IED. The general said to me, no, we can't do that. How would that look if the New York Times headline said that we were paying little kids to clean up the green zone? And I said, well, I don't know how that would look, but how would it look if the New York Times headline said that we were letting our soldiers buy porno DVDs from 10-year-old kids? So which headline would you prefer? So they wouldn't do it with the kids. They ended up, bidding out a contract, and a year and a half later, Waste Management showed up in the green zone with their big trucks and all their people. But, government bureaucracy is just incredible. I can't even tell you. I used to say to Esther every morning, we have to move a quarter of an inch today on something. We have to progress at least a quarter of an inch, because one time that we don't, this bureaucracy will just overcome us and we'll just turn out like everybody else. I've never forget being told that a woman that I knew and worked with had been kidnapped and killed, and it was the first of many. So the war in Iraq had a profound influence on the Middle East, on global security, and on me. I want you to know that in closing that Iraq didn't define me, but it was the single biggest challenge that I had ever undertaken, and it tested my deepest resolve every day. But I am happy to be here to tell you my story. It helps me talk about it. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And Jonathan's got a mic.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Eileen. Eileen has agreed to answer your questions, but I'd first like to start by asking. I'd like to first start by asking, in 2017 we'll have a new administration, and how should we work to stabilize Iraq in the future, or should we work at all to stabilize Iraq in the future?
Well, that's a really good question. I'm not sure that I have the answer. You know, I think we missed the time, because now we either have to send troops back, which nobody wants to do, and it's just a really difficult time. It might be too late to do anything about Iraq and the Middle East. It's just a powder keg waiting to burn up. Anybody have other questions?
Eileen, talk about some of the palaces you got to visit on some of your escapades.
Well, Saddam had over 250 palaces in Iraq. I mean, big palaces. And actually, when I saw the Trumps interviewed a few weeks ago on the TV, that furniture that they were sitting on, that gold, just like Saddam had, I swear to God, in all of his palaces. I called Esther and I said, Esther, that's the same furniture that was in the palaces. But he had over 250 palaces in Iraq, all over the country. And the rumor was, I don't know if this was true, but the rumor was that he would not stay at a palace more than 2 days. And they never knew where he would go. So every palace would fix huge dinners for him and his Republican Guard, his security force. They would fix these huge dinners every day because they didn't know where he would show up. And so he would show up, he would eat, and then he'd move on to another one. So every palace in Iraq fixed these gigantic dinners every day. I was at several of the palaces, but several in the green zone, and there was one in Gila that we were in. So they were all pretty awful. Karen. Yes, actually, there is a story. You know, my first week or two in the green zone, we went on a tour of. Saddam had several palaces in the green zone, and the one that we hit and we destroyed with 15 MiGs was the one that he planned to go to ride out the war. If he could get there, it went down 5 floors underneath. I forget what they called it, but it was sort of, you couldn't tell it went down 5 floors. And so we went on a tour, and so we had literally 15 MiGs hit that palace, so he couldn't get there to make a stand. And apparently this palace, and I only went down 2 floors because I was getting claustrophobic, but apparently this palace had the finest air conditioning possible in all of the world. It came from Germany. It had freezers with tons of meat and food in it. So in case the Americans attacked, he would get to that palace and he could live there for a couple of months and without being found. But of course he didn't. And so the rumor was that when they bombed it and then our military went in afterwards, that they found dead bodies in the kitchen and food was being spoiled, and I mean, it was pretty incredible. But anyway, so upstairs on the main floor of the palace, they had gigantic chandeliers 5 times bigger than this. And when the MiGs hit, all the chandeliers, of course, crashed. And so I was walking around and I picked up a couple of handfuls of the crystals. Some of them were crystals, some of them were plastic. And I had jewelry made up, and I had a couple of necklaces and earrings. And I feel like when I wear them that Saddam rolls up in his grave. And so it's sort of my little protest about how horribly he treated his people. Thank you.
We have a question in the sixth row.
Hi, Eileen.
Hi.
I wondered if you'd retained contact with any of the women who got the American contracts, and perhaps the status of women in general in Iraq now, if you are aware.
Well, no. Well, the first couple years we did, but after that we didn't. It's pretty hard. You know, they don't have electricity. It's hard to do internet. Esther probably kept track of them a little bit more than I did when I came back, because she stayed in the Middle East for a couple of years. So it's pretty hard, but I feel like a couple of them probably are still working, because they did start businesses, and the businesses they started were rebuilding police stations, rebuilding schools, putting pipeline down for water. I mean, all sorts of businesses where they would do just like we did. We'd hire a whole bunch of men, and they would supervise. I mean, it was totally appropriate in Iraq. Anybody else? Come on, you must have some questions.
I know that your primary, I heard that your primary focus was helping these women get contracts. I wonder what questions they put to you in addition to that primary focus. Were they curious about us culturally? Were they asking for other kinds of information?
Not really. You know, Iraq, before we put sanctions on Iraq had a lot of American tourists and contractors that would go there. Iraq was, years ago, was the great place to vacation. It was the beautiful place, restaurants along the Tigris River. You know, Esther's mother, who's younger than I am, would tell me stories about, you know, her being in high heels and short dresses and dancing the night away. So they, you know, they didn't have a lot of questions for us. They knew English. They didn't understand it really well, because for the years that we had sanctions, they didn't have anybody to talk to, because Americans weren't allowed to go there, British weren't allowed to go there. But for years, they knew Americans and they knew contractors, and so, but they didn't have a lot of questions. The things that I helped them with, I'll never forget public speaking, because they were very quiet when it came to American men. And so all the contracts came from the Corps of Engineers, and they were 98% men. And so, you know, they'd go for the interview, and they'd be really quiet. And I said, that is unacceptable. You know, you need to be strong and confident and speak up. And so we did all these public speaking programs. And that's sort of when I knew it was time to leave Iraq, actually, for me, because I was going out every Wednesday, and the security said it was getting pretty dangerous, because they tried to change the route all the time, but sometimes they didn't. And I mean, I was lucky that I was never in danger that I knew of. You know, you never know, but yeah, so. And they used to say to Esther, "Is she always like this?" And Esther would say, "Yeah, she is," because I used to drive them really hard. You know, they had to. You know, you had to be tough and strong and make your case. You know, you were making your case to men, American men. You know, so yeah, but they knew enough about Americans. You know, everywhere I go, every place I've traveled, they know more about Americans than we know about them. I mean, it's really fascinating to me, all over the world. Any other questions? Uh-huh. Oh. You know, I wish, you know, it's like on the top of my list, but I'm not disciplined enough to do it. I kept daily diaries. I used, yeah, I think there is too, but I'm just so lazy. And I still work, so it's hard to, you know, it's hard to get things done. But I have a guy that's talking to me now, and I don't know, we'll see. But
We have a question right here.
First, I would like to say thank you to yourself and to Esther. Thank you.
thank you.
And I was wondering if you happen to have any sort of statistic based on all the people that you helped and empowered. now, how many were still in Iraq being able to utilize the tools that you provided to them?
You know, I have no idea. It's tough to pull those stats together. You know, once we left, you know, Esther kept in touch with some of them, but it's pretty tough to pull that together. And you know, one of the things when we got to Iraq, they didn't keep track of anything. We kept track, and we forced tracking on our programs because we wanted to know how we were doing. We didn't have to report anything, but we did. And we kept track as best we could on the kinds of contracts women were getting. And we were always outside our lane. How many times did we get told that? I mean, I remember the great story was the Minister of Women, who was appointed by the premier, a great woman who had been a soldier in Kirkuk. Wherever. In the Kurdish area. She'd been, and she'd actually killed somebody, so protecting her husband. So anyway, she became the Minister of Women, and with a budget of $1,000 a year. Yeah. So Esther's mother knew her, and Esther's mother asked her if she would, if I could talk to her, and so I said yes, and we went to see her. Her office was in the green zone, and she smoked so much, didn't she? I mean, one after another. It was really incredible. But smart lady, tougher than nails. And she told me that day that she was going to, in 2 weeks, she was going to Congress to speak to the women in our Congress. And I said, well, what are you going to tell them? And she said, well, you know, I don't know. And I said, you can't go to Congress and talk to women and you don't know what you're going to say? What's your platform? Well, I don't know. Well, you have to have a platform. I'll help you develop a platform. You know me, my business is everybody's business. So I pulled, 5 or 6 women together that I had met in the green zone because I didn't want it to be my platform. I wanted it to be her platform. I pulled 5 or 6 women together. We brought in lunch. We had a lovely day, and we sat around, and we all developed a platform for her so that when she went to Washington, she would be able to say what Ministry of Women was going to do and gain support for our women in Congress so that they would force more money into the ministry. That was my idea. So anyway, and during that time, this is why I say they're so disrespectful to the Iraqis. So during that meeting, it was an all-day meeting, and it was just going really well. And this young woman who, to me, seemed like she was 18, came to the door and said, so I went outside, and she said, you can't be doing this. This is outside your lane. And I said, I don't understand. And she said, you can't be talking to the Ministry of Women. That's my job. It's my job to help her. And I said, well, you know, I'd only say that you're not doing a very good job if in 2 weeks she's going to Congress and she doesn't know what she's going to say. So you should come in and participate with us. And she said, no, you don't understand. I'm up here and you're down here. And I said, oh, honey, that's just not right. I said, only God is above me, and no. I said, you should learn something and come in. You know, I have a lot of experience and I can help you. I mean, you look like you're 17 years old. So she reported me, she gave me a really nasty report. She told me she was going to report me, and I said, well, really, I didn't care. I mean, all they could do is shoot me or send me home. Either one at that point would have been fine for me. And so when I got back, the guy that we were assigned to said, you know, I got this terrible report on you. And he said, what do you want me to do? I said, really, I don't really give a damn. You know, you can do anything you want with it. I don't care. He said, well, you're out of your lane. They were always telling me I was out of my lane. Working with government is so incredible. I'm telling you, it's just the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my whole life. But anyway, so that was just one of the screw-ups around there. But we helped her. She went to Congress. She did a pretty decent job, but you know, not a great job. So she didn't get a lot of support. But her budget was $1,000 a year. I mean, come on. So anyway, I told her. I mean, that's what the minister. I said, what are you going to do? And she said, well, I'm waiting for the minister to tell me what to do. And I said, no. You're going to tell him what you're going to do. So, yeah, that's typical. But anyway, any other questions?
We have a question towards the back.
Eileen, thanks so much. This has really been enlightening
You're
for all of
welcome.
us, even when we followed your journey during that time. And I have two questions. The first is, for the women who attended your seminars, what did they do about child care, number one? And number two, I recall that you were in touch with friends here in the States with wish lists, and they were packaging up stuff to send you care packages. And I think it would be fun for people to hear what was on your list and what was sent to you. But first, child care.
Well, childcare, the women live with their mothers, and I mean, it's a big family, so childcare was never really a problem for them. When the women went out to work, they had their mothers or their sisters living right there, so that was pretty much taken care of. For the people that sent me things, I mean, I think I was one of the most popular people in the Green Zone. I had so many wonderful friends. Every week I would get big boxes of stuff. Wine, you couldn't send wine by mail, but my friends would label it shampoo or grape juice or whatever. I'd get cookies and coffee and creamer, and I mean, there wasn't anything that every day we had these little alleys, our desks were on both sides of the alley, and there was about this much room to walk between the desks. And we always had so many boxes piled up. It was phenomenal. I had a friend in Florida who owns a cigar company, and so she knows how to get things mailed and stuff. So she would, anything that we needed, whether it was suntan lotion, makeup, my fly rod, flies, boots, anything, she would get it mailed to us. And then my friends would send me. I could never go hungry or be sober. I don't drink very much. I'm a one glass of wine person, but I had more bottles of wine in my trailer than any liquor store, and so I was really popular on Thursday nights.
Eileen, you've talked an awful lot about Ezra, and she's sitting right here. I was wondering if we could all meet her.
Yes, I was going to bring her up. Esther, stand up. There were some days in the Green Zone where the mortars got so bad that they couldn't send food in, so the food would stay at the airport, and they couldn't get the trucks to transport food, and we would have to eat MREs, and everybody was handed MREs except for Esther and I, because Esther's mother always brought us fresh roasted chicken and vegetables and potato chips, French fries, and bread. So we always ate very well, but everybody else was eating MREs, which are really horrible.
We have a question right here.
Thank you, Eileen, and thank you, Ezra. Eileen, did I hear you correctly in saying that there was a price on your head?
Yes.
And could you elaborate on that a little more? And was it just you because of your outstanding irritation that you were inflicting on everybody, or was it everybody in your group?
I think there were some that had a price on my head, but the real price on my head was $300,000 for any American woman. So inside the Green Zone, when the U.S. forces moved into the Green Zone, which was all the government buildings, there were already about 10,000 Iraqis who lived there. And they couldn't just push them out because that would have made bad headlines. So they lived there and stayed there. And so our security always said, you don't know who is, around. You can't take any cabs. You can't take any food from anybody. I mean, you always had to be careful. And so we were. I mean, we couldn't do anything. We had to have security. We couldn't go out of the Green Zone, although we did a couple times. We snuck out a couple times. Because Esther's mother and father would always take care of us. But we weren't allowed to do that.
We wore that.
Yeah, we wore they made me sit in the back seat with a cover on, and yeah, it was pretty fun. But and we went to this art place one time, and I loved the art, and the guy who took us kept saying, "Don't talk, I'll do all the talking." So I'd have to hit him on the leg and say, that one, what, so it was always a challenge. But I'll tell you, if I didn't have Esra with me, I couldn't have gotten anything done, and I probably would have been kidnapped, because it just was pretty incredible. But Esra's family was very well connected. Their tribe is well known and well respected. So she not only had the language skills and the culture, she knew the culture, and I even tried to sell her one time. We were down in southern Nevada, and I tried to sell her. I told the sheikh that I would sell Esra for 15 cows and to get a ride that we needed, but it didn't work out. Yeah.
We have a question in the front row.
Yeah.
You've never mentioned the men in Iraqi. Being Armenian, I know that the men don't like the women going to work and keep them subservient. Even their mothers don't like the women to do that. So I wonder if you had that kind of a feedback from the men.
I don't think so. I mean, in Iraq, we were dealing with, the poorest of Iraqis. Those women, probably weren't heading their families. They were very religious and very poor. But the women that we were dealing with were mostly educated, and they had, in most cultures, I believe, women really run the family behind the scenes, but they run the family. And Iraq was similar. I mean, women were very strong in Iraq, and so, yeah, we never had any trouble with the men.
Question in the front row. We have time for one more.
Knowing you as well as I do, I can't hardly say this without crying myself, but I want to know, after all this and all you've been through, and after hearing about it tonight, I want to know what's important to you is, it was worth it, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Oh. There were days when I thought, oh, my God, shoot me. It is hard living in Iraq, I'll tell you. Very hard living. I mean, it was dirty, it was hot. When it rained, it was muddy and awful. Oh, my God. I mean, it was hard, not only physically, but emotionally. I mean, the sound of gunfire and mortars 24/7 really takes a toll on you. And it was something that I did. I never have regretted one day, 1 hour. And I went back twice after I left. I went twice to do a State Department project. And but would I go back? No. I mean, I just wouldn't. I've had an offer to go back, and no, I wouldn't. It's just really tough living there, very tough. But I wouldn't have changed it. It changed my life. I mean, it really did. And it made me so much more sensitive to people and their own problems. And, the first year I came back from Iraq, I had PTSD. In the funniest sort of ways. One way that I didn't want to socialize, but my friends forced me out occasionally. But another way, this is really bizarre, two things. One, I cannot use a wash rag anymore. I use a hand towel for my face. And for some reason in Iraq, they used to clean our rooms, and I always felt that they cleaned with our wash rags. And so to this day, I can't wash my face with a wash rag. I use a hand towel. That, and the other thing is, this is really stupid, but I feel sorry for everything. I mean, if a plastic bag flies across the street, I feel sorry for that plastic bag. I'm not kidding you. It is so bizarre. I feel sorry for animals. I feel sorry. I mean, I'm just so sensitive to those things that bother people, that hurt people's feelings. Anything like that I'm very sensitive to, and I won't tolerate it with anyone. So I think those are the two things that really, really, I don't know, have you? I mean, Esther's now a mother living in Newport Beach. I'm so proud of her. Do you have any PTSD?
I don't eat buffets because after the mess hall, that just gets to me.
The mess hall was horrible, yeah. I remember we used to eat hamburgers, and they'd come in from the United States, everything was imported. They'd come in frozen, and then they would boil them. And the smell of boiled meat in the morning, was horrible. That's the food that we were given every day in the green zone, and KBR, had the contract, and every plate of food was like $30, right?
Yeah.
So they would charge our government $30 for this horrible plate of food. I mean, it was just amazing. There's so much abuse. I could write a book on the abuse of our tax dollars there, but I won't. Anyway.
Thank you, Eileen. Please give Eileen a round of applause.
Thanks. Thank you.